Go where your best prayers take you. Unclench the fists of your spirit and take it easy. Breathe deeply of the glad air and live one day at a time. Know that you are precious and learn to trust. Amen. Well, good morning to everybody. It's great to see all of you. I'll remind you again that we have some new listening devices, hearing devices, and they are excellent. They are the newest breed, the newest kind, and they will help you. So please don't hesitate to use them. The ushers have them. We have about 8 sets. If we need more, we sure will get a few more. And I was passing Father Lewis, and I said, "Are you going to use one of those for your hearing aids?" He said, "I don't have it in." So he's not listening this morning. See, look, I told you. He couldn't even hear me get on him. I'm telling you, it's terrible. And welcome to all our new singers in the choir. We welcome you all. We'll get to know you, put your pictures up, and get your name. So we're glad you're with us today. Thank you for being here. I want to ask you a question. I'm going to need your participation in just a little bit. When you leave here today and go home and look at the television, boot up your computer, grab the newspaper, sit down with a magazine, through the rest of this day, probably started already for most of you, how many images and ideas will you see in this 24-hour period? There's some studies about this, some very erudite studies and important studies. So I want to guess, how many do you think? Somebody give me a number. What do you think we see in a day? 1,000. How many really, I want you to pay attention a bit, how many think it's more than that? Yeah, it is more than that. Do you know how much more? It's 5,000. 5,000 images a day. The average American in an average 24-hour period sees and is confronted with. The majority of those, you're aware, are advertisements. They really are, trying to sell you something. But I don't want you to get lost in that part. It's just fascinating to me that we talk all the time as if things are the way they used to be. I bet most of you, I'm in my 50s, I bet many of you at my age or older, you know you were not seeing 5,000 images a day when you were a child. You see, something really is different around us and kind of in us, I think, in today's culture. There's no doubt about it. And I wonder with all those images how any of us pay attention at all. Really and truly, think about it. There's so much stuff coming. How do you filter it? How do you work with it? How do you get through it? We're all in this boat together. Have you heard of your reticular activating system? Do you know what that is? The reticular activating system? It's an actual something. It's a bundle of neurons that are connected to your cortex and into the medulla oblongata and some other things. And what it does is it helps wake you up from being asleep. But the other important thing that your brain does for you is help you focus. Help you focus and see and really pay attention, particularly to the things that you need to pay attention to. You know, when we were in caves building fires and running from tigers, it was paying attention that the tiger was chasing you. So that part of our brain is active. What's fascinating, all the studies reflect, is sometimes it doesn't work so well, particularly when our stress and strain are very high. Some of you have heard me tell the story about myself and my wife Lois. We were in the mall at one of the big box stores shopping. She was dress shopping, I think. Will, who is 28, 29, was a little bitty boy. And she was shopping. I'm watching Will, giving my nod to dresses. You know how that works? You guys, okay. Anyway, we're doing that drill. I'm keeping up with Will, and Will's crawling under stuff, climbing on stuff. And I keep kind of watching him, not paying, it's a Monday or something, not many people in the mall. The next thing I know, Will is gone. Really gone. At first and of course I get down on my knees, and people think I've lost my mind, looking under the clothes racks. And it was just everywhere. And all of a sudden I realized I was overwhelmed with how much stuff there is on these stores, shelves and everything. And I looked, I couldn't find him. I yelled at Lois, she came out, she started looking. It wasn't but about 2 minutes and we were panicked. And then when the couple of sales clerks started helping, they were panicked too. And then my panic got higher. I'm not proud of this, but I'll tell you what I did. Instantly, my brain went into John Ross overdrive. I ran through the store and straight into the mall thinking somebody grabbed my son, they were taking off with him. I ran down the mall. I mean, fast. Didn't see him. Turned around and ran back. I was going to make sure he didn't go out that way. Came back into the mall, went back into that area again. Still, there's no Will. Say the least, I can even telling it, I feel the panic again. So you know how it's shaped? It's like a circle. So I started going each area around the circle, around the loop, and you come back. I'm zipping and I'm looking at, and by this time the word's gotten out. Security's there. Everybody's looking. We are not finding Will. We look everywhere. And then I'm starting to kind of half moving, walking, and almost running, kind of in a loop. And I run past somebody. I run past one of the sales clerks and a little boy, and I run by. I just ran past Will Ross. I want you to know I didn't even see him. I ran right past my child, who I had panically been looking for 10 minutes, did not see him. I ran past, and about the third person, it's kind of like, it's like catching a plane on an aircraft carrier. About the third sales clerk finally grabbed a hold of me and said, Dad, we've got him. You just ran past him. So I turned around. Well, you know what he had done. He'd crawled under some clothes, went out the chute, run. He'd gone around the loop. Well, a stinking sales clerk had grabbed his arm, a mom, and said, no, you're not going anywhere, and held on to him. But boy, did that teach me something. Right there in front of me, and I couldn't see him. Looked right at him and didn't see him. Today, Jesus tells a story of a man just like you and me. And his world has enough stress and strain and stuff about life. Well, let me tell you the way Jesus tells it. That he drives every day out of his driveway, gets in his car, goes to work. I want you to picture yourself, you drove out of your driveway this morning. As you backed onto the street, right beside your driveway was a man named Lazarus. He's been sleeping there every night. And you back out like this man and drive away, you don't see him. Now, I know we're all hooked by this story because it's a rich man and a poor man. One goes to heaven, one goes to hell. We know who goes to hell. It's the rich man. So we get all hooked in that. I want you to kind of back up with me very slowly and don't miss the essential first ingredient that Jesus gives us that I think is the most salient. He doesn't see the man. He doesn't see him. You with me? He doesn't see him. I know this is a story about helping those in need and all of that business, but before we get there, it's about not seeing. Absolutely. And what does it mean to begin to see? Really see. Some of y'all know we tell Fred Craddock stories. He was a brilliant preacher and teacher, just an incredible man. When he was a young man in his first parish, he said he was working hard all the time, and at the end of the week he'd be tired. And on this particular Friday when he got home, he had a guest who was staying with him, another minister staying with him, is going to preach in church on Sunday. And so he got home, did his normal routine, walked in the door on Friday, took off his work stuff, put on some casual clothes, put on some house shoes, got a drink, jumped into a chair, an easy chair, and pulled out the paper and just started relaxing. He said he hadn't been reading the paper long when he noticed that his little boys were playing on the floor and his friend, the minister, the guest in his house, was on the floor with his boys playing. He said he kind of noticed it and went back and read. He said a few minutes later he looked up and he looked out the window and the boys were out playing hide and seek. And his friend, the minister, his guest, was out in the yard with his boys playing hide and seek. A few more minutes go by, and then he gets up and he goes to the window and he looks out because he thought he saw what he saw, and sitting in a little gnarl are all his kids almost on top of his friend, the minister, and his youngest is in his friend's lap. And he said, right about there, that's where that punch in the chest came. The hard one that got his attention. And he got the point. He got the insight. You know, when do I come home and I'm so wrung out that I spend any time with my children? Well, you know, all of us can identify with that story. I bet you. Everybody here has something about your life. If you're not married, don't have children, doesn't matter. It's not about that. It's about we all need something to kickstart us, to get our attention. You know, we are taught just to run and do all the time, and we are about that stuff. But I want to remind you of something. Most often in life, our story today reminds us that you have to see before you do. You have to see before you do. And the truth be known, that being able to see takes a lot of time and effort. It has its own journey with us. It needs its own time. We need to be about things that help us see. I want to give you an historical example. Most of you know that the Quakers were a big part of what helped Americans do away with slavery. You're aware of that. Their voice in the whole conversation. What you may not know is some of the conversation then about the Quakers. There was a man named John Woolman, and he was a businessman by trade. He was a tailor, but he sold things to the Quakers so that they would make things. And so he got to be part of their community, and he visited often. And in church, he was not a Quaker, and in church during this period of time, he had something come to him, a thought. And it was this thought. I'm going to give you his quote. Here's his old English. He said, the quote was this, a vision, that of God in every person. That of God in every person. That of God is in every person. The Quakers owned slaves. And he made a commitment. And he started the next week. When he visited and sold to the Quakers and spent time with them, he didn't preach, didn't yak at them. The first thing he did was, when one of the slaves did something for him in one of their houses, when he was staying there, sleeping there, selling, whatever, he would give the slave some money. And he made sure that the Quaker owners saw him do it. And then the next thing he did was make sure he learned every slave's name. He knew them on sight by name. I want you to know that history tells us that John Woolman did that for 20 years. And it was the Quakers and their early stand against slavery in American history that really changed the game. So I think John Woolman could hold that tension between reality, what we all live, and then that business of possibility. But in that place, I'm going to remind you again, you have to see before you do. You have to see before you do. All right, let me give you an example a little closer to home then. I had the privilege last week before, to go with Kristen Williams and Tommy Seiler and Patty Thiel over to Green Magnet School. They are your endowment committee, but they pick up, along with Tommy and some others, many of you in the congregation know what we're trying to do, and you're going to hear more about this, is to think a little bit bigger than we've ever thought. Is there something that St. John's, and I don't mean our money, I mean you and me together, can do somewhere together for a long period of time that would make an impact? In other words, like take on Green Magnet School. So they were over to get a visit, invited me graciously to go with them. And it's an incredible thing. You realize that school is 2 blocks away in one of the hardest neighborhoods in Knoxville, with most of the families just disassembled. They have 340 students, 40 are magnet kids who come from other places to find the science and math that's taught there. But most are in the neighborhood, literally almost come across the street to school. Their needs are overwhelming. But what they're doing is amazing. They have an aftercare program, much like we see at St. Anne's in New York, and it's phenomenal. They're just doing great, making great strides. And they're looking for partners to help. They would love for us to help. They'd love for anybody to help. Well, what was fun was the principal, Becky Lykin, spent some time with us. That was kind of a pleasure. She took us around, showed us the program. And then we went outside, and a couple of us just stood and talked. And Becky had driven away, started to leave, and got out of her car and came over to start talking to us for a minute. And I'd been curious about it, so I said to her, Becky, can I ask you a question? Why are you here? What are you doing in this place? I mean, this is tough work. And she said, well, you know, I was in Atlanta. I'm an educator, principal. They recruited me because Powell High School was in trouble. They needed somebody to come in. She was their caretaker, and then they took over the job. She said, a dream job. I loved it. But I knew there was something more I needed to do. And they put a call out from central office. They just needed a principal at Green Magnet. And she said, I thought, I'll try it. And then I got over here, and instantly I was over my head. Just nightmare. And just kind of talked about that, about how hard it was at first. And she said, you know, I want to tell you what happened, though. She said, one Friday when I just, you know, at the end of the week, just exhausted, not making what's going to happen. You know, I'm failing at this. So I went in my office, got my stuff up. It was late. She works lots of hours. Got my stuff together, went over to my chair, got my purse, and she said, stuffed beside my purse was a notebook paper about like this that had been folded down to a piece of paper about like this. And she said, I realized somebody had folded something and left it for me. So, well, stuck it in my pocket, got my car, drove off. She lives in Powell, so she's, you know, does the downtown traffic loop, which is a nightmare. Got to the light, got stuck, traffic heavy. She said, I just fished in my pocket and pulled it out. She said, I started unwrapping this piece of paper, and in this little handwriting was a little note from one of my students. And here's what it said. It said, every day you come in and look at me. Every day you come in and smile at me. Every day you come in and say my name, and it makes me want to go to school. She said she sat through the light. Because of her tears, she couldn't see to drive. You see, when we really look at ourselves, we empower others to look at themselves. But it's not looking at them. It's looking at ourselves that empowers them to look at themselves, to move from reality to possibility. I'll say it again. We must see before we do. But when we do see what we can do, well, it's just limitless, isn't it? Amen.